Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. So today, it's not really part two from last week, but they are connected. I'm speaking about the impermanence of form and the way that, as I said on the video, that the way Spirit moves in and out of form. All form is temporary. We let it go at the end of the service today, and we're inviting people to join us at 12:30 for our Burning Bowl, which is normally on New Year's Eve, but we're going to do it today because we've been a year now in this process of COVID and pandemic, and it feels like a good time to release. So over here in the corner, we have our chimenea. We're going to be releasing anything that no longer serves us as we step into a new year of glorious unfolding. That's the title today, the glorious unfolding. But first, Billy Graham, world-renowned preacher. He could fill stadiums and do these amazing crusades, but I like the fact that he always kept a little humility about him. And he had a story that he would tell often in his giant crusades about his early days in ministry. And he was preaching a revival in a small town in the South, and he wanted to mail a letter. And he was downtown. He saw a young boy there, and he said, "Excuse me, can you give me the directions to the post office?" And the young boy said, "Sure," and told him where it was. And Reverend Billy Graham said, "Thank you so much. Now, if you come to the revival where I'm preaching tonight, I'm going to give you directions to heaven." The little boy looked at him and said, "You don't even know where the post office is. I'm not coming." What I said last week about this cycle of, generating new and better and higher forms from our consciousness and releasing that which is done, that which is over. If we are able to bring our conscious mind to this process of creation and release, then we are freed from this cycle of repeating the patterns of our wounded past. That's what they say, nothing changes, nothing changes. And one of the definitions of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. We are about evolution, growth, becoming. We want to continue forever to evolve and to rise higher in our oneness with God and the power that is within us. And I want to tell you that in our Western culture, we have been limited in some ways by the predominant thought in terms of spirit and time. Everything in our culture has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so this has translated into Western religion, and particularly in Christianity, where we have this idea that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then there's a lot of stuff in the middle. And in the end, it's all going to be over. We're going to sing and play harps forever, if you're doing it right. Because I was taught in that tradition that, this is something we said, I've looked in the back of the book and I saw who won. Isn't that great? And it's a wonderful story and a wonderful metaphor, a way of, a lens for looking at reality. But today I want to offer a different one. That our spiritual lives didn't begin, and we don't have a middle, and then we're over, that it is an eternal, we are participating in the eternal life of God right now. You do have an eternal life, and this is part of it. It's not all of it, but this is your now. And that as we move into the conscious, creative energy of God, then we begin to rise higher and higher. And so we have to be careful that we're not limiting ourselves to some of the ideas about time and life that we came up with. Like I was taught a lot about, you will finish the race. Do you ever heard that one? That's one of the spiritual analogies. I've worked hard, but I have finished the race. How about victory? You hear this a lot in traditional Christianity and in spiritual terms. I'm going to gain victory over this trial that I'm going through. It's not bad. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but we need something more. Here's the problem with victory. If victory is the aim, the only aim of your spiritual life, it only leaves you with two other options. You're either battling or you're defeated. But what if we were a part of a spiritual life that was so big, so vast, that everything is for our good, and that we're never going to complete it? It will always be rising, evolving, becoming. We are moving ever, ever, ever into a greater awareness and experience of the God presence within us. Am I wrong? Does that just sound like a little bit better deal? I love this idea that we will forever be rising in spirit, forever being releasing all those things that no longer serve, that, you know, it's like the caterpillar body is great, but it's done. You know, it's done. Something else wants to happen, a new and higher form of our consciousness, of our lives. Yep, said everything I want to say about that. Simon Sinek is a futurist and a great thinker. He's written several books. Start With Why was his big book. Recently, I listened to an interview with him and wonderful local, Brene Brown. And she was talking about this idea of this limited thinking that we have. And he was saying that so much of business in America and in the Western world is around win and lose. And he talked about the battle between Blockbuster and Netflix. Remember that battle? Who won? Netflix. Well, he says not really, because the game isn't over. You see, the companies that are able to take on this ongoing game, not one that has 4 quarters and the whistle blows and whoever has the most points win, but to keep the game moving. And he talks about the energy of that playfulness. It's just to play and play well can be the goal. And I'm really thinking about that in terms of our organizational strength and our organizational ideas, that we want to stay in the game. We want to find new ways of reaching people. You know, now we're live streaming on 6 different platforms to people all around. That's one of the new ways. But what's next? We're not done there. We want to keep moving, keep responding, keep listening to what life is offering us now. And that's true for us individually too. And you may have retired from your job, but your work isn't over. There's more for you to do, and there's more for you to receive in terms of fulfillment and freedom forever. Not just when you're living here, breathing in this body, but let's start there, shall we? Let's just start right here in this body, and yes, with that family and that husband or that wife. Let's start here. And let's see how we can free ourselves from the old forms, the old thought forms that created the substance forms, and see what we can release so that we can step into our great and glorious unfolding. Integration is the healing. You see, if we have moved from this linear time frame that there's a beginning, middle, and there's an ending, and we've moved into this eternal, glorious unfolding, then everything that comes into our experience is fruitful. Everything has a gift for us if we are in this mindset. Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for the good of them that love God and are called according to his purpose. In my old beginning, middle, end time frame, that mind frame, that's what I used to think that's the reward. You get saved and now you're with God and then everything works together for good. That's the reward you get for doing it right. And now I've come to see that it's reverse. That if we get our consciousness with God, then all of our experience is now reframed through our understanding to be for us. Nothing and no one is against us. And I know some of you have had some mountains that you've been climbing over. Some of you have had some valleys you've been going through. And it would be understandable to say, that's enough. There's nothing here for me. But there is something here for you. There is a gift in this for you if you're willing to put your mind with God, with good, with possibility, with becoming, then this too will reveal something for you that otherwise would not have been revealed in your life. There's a song Well, how do I have time? Yeah, I just want to briefly touch on forgiveness. My Reverend Sheila is here. She's our local forgiveness expert. But I want to tell you, we all have forgiveness work to do. You know what Edwene Gaines says about it? Reverend Edwene Gaines, who's spoken here many times, she said, here's the simple test to see whether or not you have forgiveness work to do. Are you breathing? And that's it. If you're breathing, you have forgiveness work to do. And to remind you, forgiveness does not mean forgetness. Doesn't mean you're not going to remember what happened. And forgiving does not mean condoning. It doesn't mean that what happened is okay. Forgiveness is releasing the idea that the past will ever be different than it was and integrating it into who you are now. The past has brought you here, which is the perfect place for God to create a wonderful future for you. Do you hear that? I just made that up. I'm going to say it again. The past has brought you here, which is the perfect place for the future that God will create within you and for you right now. So I love to tell stories. And I'd forgotten that I had almost an identical talk title about a year ago. I think I called it The Great Unfolding, and I thought, well, I don't remember giving it that recently, but okay. So I looked at everything I had, and I always like to have a story. And my favorite story to share in this topic is the story of Joseph, because he went through so many mountains and valleys, so many ups and downs, and it all worked together for his good. It's a great story, but I've done it. I did it about a year ago. So yesterday afternoon, I was talking to John. I often use John as my backboard to kind of test ideas in the sermon. He said, yeah, I'm looking for a story about resilience and overcoming and evolution and integrating. And he's on his Kindle, he's reading. He looks a little distracted. And he's like, okay, I'll think about that. And then he goes, a little bit later, he goes upstairs. And the book that he had been reading that I was bothering him was called, what's it called? The Choice. And he texted me, yes, we do that now, from upstairs to downstairs. He said, you might look at the story of Edith Eger. That's the author of the book he was reading, that you were just too distracted in her story to realize that her story is the perfect story I needed to illustrate my sermon. Thank you very much. Boris and I are working on a duet for you, and today was not the right day to do it, but we're going to. And the song, I get to be Justin Timberlake in this duet, Boris, just so you know. But in one of the versions of the song, Kirk Franklin does a little spoken intro, and he says this. If you've been watching my Friday Lives, you've heard me say this a few times because it really has moved me. He says, some come through the storm better, and some come through the storm bitter. And the difference between the bitter and the better is the compass of the heart and the direction you want to go. Let me tell you the story of Edith. Oh, so much here. I'm just going to bring up my notes in case I missed something. Edith Eva Eger was born in Kausa, Hungary in 1927, September 29th. She had a really wonderful sort of middle-class life. Her father was a successful tailor. Her mother was a homemaker. She had two older sisters. Can't remember the older one's name. It'll come back to me. Was a violin prodigy and performed publicly a violin concerto at the age of 5. As Edith says, that's a hard act to follow. Her middle sister, Magda, was a great beauty and also a gifted pianist. And so Edith was like, well, what am I going to do? She had a great personality. Her sisters made fun of her. She had a crossed eye when she was little, and they would tell her she's so ugly, she's never going to find a husband. And she says that now. She tells the story with no sense of resentment. She has long forgiven any of that. But she said it actually did a good thing for her, that it caused her to spend a lot of time on her own, and she built a lot of inner resources. She was a gifted dancer and studied ballet. She was a gifted gymnast, had a lot of energy and vitality. She was on the Hungarian national team and was training for the Olympics when she was 15, when something changed in her world. One day, the coach came up to her and said, you're no longer on the team. I'm going to have to give your spot and train someone else. And Edith said, why? And her coach said, because you're Jewish. It wasn't the first time that Edith had experienced anti-Semitism. She says that she remembers leaving her Jewish school at 5 years old and the other Hungarian kids spitting on the Jewish kids and calling them dog and pig. So she knew what this was. A few months after being kicked off the gymnastics team, her family was having the final Seder dinner at Passover in their home. And there was a knock at the door, and it was the SS. And her family was removed from their home. The SS moved into her family's home, and she and about 12,000 other Jewish people there in Kausa were moved into a shut-down, vacant brick factory. And they were there for a while, and then the trains began. And she and her family were put on a cattle car, and we know these stories. But you see, she had never heard of a place called Auschwitz. She didn't know what was happening. She was 16 years old, a child, really, a young girl with her mother and her sister Magda. Her older sister had been accepted to a very prestigious music conservatory in Prague, and her Christian music teacher knew what was happening and hid her away through the entire war. It's what in Israel, they called them the righteous Christians who hid the Jews from the Holocaust. They arrived, before they left Kausa, Edith has a memory of being in the cattle car and looking out through the slats and seeing her boyfriend. They may have told her she was ugly, but she had a boyfriend. And she loved this boyfriend. And he looked at her and he knew what was happening. I don't think either of them knew it would be the last time they saw each other, but he said, "I see your beautiful eyes. I see your beautiful hands." And in the darkest of the dark times when she was in Auschwitz, she would comfort herself and she would find strength to face another day with that thought. She said, "I would say, tomorrow, my boyfriend will see my beautiful eyes and my beautiful hands," as her body wasted away from abuse and starvation. They arrived at Auschwitz and they immediately separated the men and the women. She never saw her father again. He was immediately executed in the gas chambers. They separated the women and the girls, and her mother went to the right and her sister went to the left, and she followed her mother and Mengele himself, Dr. Death. He said to Edith, he said, "Is this your mother or your sister?" And she didn't know what was going on. She didn't know. She told the truth. She said, "It's my mother." And Mengele separated Edith and put her back with the younger girls and her mother. And she said, "Your mother's just going to go take a shower." And she was into the gas chamber. She never saw her mother again. The next year was, as you said, we know these stories, the starvation, the deprivation. At one point, Edith weighed 40 pounds. Mengele had heard she was a dancer and commanded her to perform for him and his officers. And at 40 pounds and starving and abused and having lost her parents, still with her beloved sister Magda, they took care of each other in that experience. She danced. That vital life force. And if you see her, she's still alive, 93. She has this vitality, this joy that just is who she is. And she danced, and Mengele rewarded her with a loaf of bread. She was starving, and yet she shared that loaf of bread with the other girls in the barracks. When the Allied forces were advancing, the Nazis, what they would do is they would empty the concentration camps, and what they did death marches to other work camps that were farther away from the Allied forces, and that's what happened. A 35-mile march, many died. Edith had a broken back, had 5 strains of typhoid fever, and she would have died on that death march except for one thing. 2 of the young women who she had shared her bread with, they saw her. And they came and they formed a chair and they carried her to the new death camp. It was so horrendous that when the 71st Infantry from the United States Army showed up to liberate that camp, she was with a whole pile of dead bodies and they thought she was dead. And one soldier thought he saw her move her hand. She was rescued, put into a hospital where she began to recover. They didn't give her much chance, but Edith has a life force about her, and she did recover. At 93, she still swing dances every Sunday. She met her husband. They married quickly. They moved to America. She said that most of the survivors of the death camps did marry quickly. They didn't know how to process what they'd gone through. They had no words or language for grief or healing, but they wanted to become normal as quickly as they could. So they married and started families, and they moved to America. And she had 3 children. And it was 20 years later, she never spoke of what happened to her. And 20 years later, her rage and her anger was overtaking her, and somebody suggested a therapist. And she started to do the work of grief and healing. And she, as many do, continued her work by becoming a therapist. I'm not meaning to look at you, Dr. Randall Brailsford. I'm just seeing you over there. I'm just teasing you. We love, Randall serves so many with this beautiful work. And she finished her PhD in psychology at University of Texas at El Paso. She began to work with trauma patients. She did so much amazing work. And it wasn't until 1990, 50 years later, she felt strong enough to return to Auschwitz. And that became the central symbol for her work. That the central theme of her healing work with trauma patients, you must face the pain of what happened to you. You have to feel to heal. Do you hear that? Pushing it away, suppressing it will not heal you. It's like poison that you keep in your body. She says, you have to feel. You don't stay there in that prison. The past brought you here, but you decide where you want to go to create your future. You will always have a choice. Will you live in anger and pain, or will you live from hope? She has a definition of love. I'd like to share it with you. 2 words, letting go. That's a little thing I picked up from watching a video of Edith. She says, not everything that happens to you is a gift, but there is a gift in everything that happens to you. We cannot choose to have a life free of hurt, but we can choose to be free, to escape the past, no matter what befalls us, and to embrace the possible. In the opening pages of her book, she says, I invite you to make the choice to be free. At 93, she still has a patient list. She is in active practice in La Jolla, California. She is on faculty at University of California at San Diego. She gets called to do work all around the world. She was called to Fort Carson, Colorado, to work with some soldiers returning from Afghanistan who were experiencing PTSD. It was the 71st Infantry, the same company that saved her life in that death camp. She was able to heal the new men and women who were the soldiers of that company. You have a choice. I have a choice. She says some of her patients, they don't want to talk about their trauma because nothing can compare to hers. But she said, no. I have done this so that I am available to be a loving witness for your healing journey. I don't know what your future will look like. But I know this. If nothing changes, nothing changes. If you are in the prison of your thought, Edith asked her patients this one question. What are you going to do different today? Or what are you going to stop doing? Because if you keep doing what you are doing, you will remain in prison. I invite you now to join me in prayer. We have a choice. The gift of life, if we have a breath, we have a choice. So God, in this moment, quicken within our mind and heart what it is that is calling us into the ever unfolding of our future. What is the next step? What must be released? What must be accepted? What must we stop doing? What must we begin? Enliven our intuition. Guide us. Show us what is here for us, that we may be free. That we may be free to live the life you have called us to and equipped us for. We begin by releasing anyone that we have held as wrong, anyone that we have been holding in blame, we let them go. And that energy that we've been using in blame, we now draw into our own being. And we take responsibility to move forward, responsible for our own healing, our own becoming, our own yes. And we know, God, that you empower and lift us in that yes into our healing, into our wholeness. So I speak a word of gratitude for everyone within the sound of my voice, for the enlivening newness that is coming into lives, that we are stepping into it free to be exactly who we are. We celebrate this newness as we release the oldness. Thank you, God. It is good, and so it is. Amen.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.